Hey guys, this is Andrew with High Level Reviews, and today I'd like to take a look at Saga Frontier 2. It was released in January of 2000 on the original PlayStation and received fairly positive reviews overall, with the primary focus being on its beautiful hand-drawn backgrounds, which pretty much became the distinguishing factor for the video game. That and its incredibly complex combat system. Like many titles in the Saga series, Saga Frontier 2 utilizes a very open-ended structure, very non-linear, though more linear than previous titles for sure. You're allowed to bounce back and forth between different scenarios and different characters, sometimes with years separating the two. However, Saga Frontier 2 had some very specific flaws to address. The first Saga Frontier was far too unforgiving in its combat, was graphically below standards, and the story lacked focus. In fact, IGN at the time called it the only bruised apple in Square's collection of role-playing games. And for the most part, it did manage to address most of the major flaws that existed in the first game, though it did manage to retain the rather complex and sometimes infuriating combat system. The game starts off focused on Gustav XIII, the Prince of Thermes, and on his 7th birthday it comes time for him to participate in a firebrand ceremony, where he must show signs of his own anima, a substance that existed within all living things, and something that humans were unable to control until the invention and discovery of quells, by igniting the firebrand. After he's unable to do this, his father, Gustav XII, exiles him and his mother in one of the more harsh scenes you'll see in a video game. Unfortunately, and this is a major problem in most of the game, the scene falls flat. Because while the scene is certainly emotional and objectively harsh, the writing feels so contrived and forced that you almost laugh at the way the king approaches the situation. He goes from loving and hopeful father and supporter of his son to one that absolutely wants nothing to do with him, and eventually his wife. If they'd spent just a little bit longer, or devoted one or two more scenes to developing that relationship between king and son, this particular scene might not have felt so rushed and inorganic. The other plotline focuses on Will Knights, a quell hunter and one that is trying to investigate the disappearance of his family and of a mysterious artifact known as the Egg. His story lasts 3 generations. Yes, 3 generations, nearly 100 years. And it's pretty cool to be able to eventually play as his granddaughter and him in the same party as an 80-year-old man. While I must praise them for the vision and scope it takes to create a story that spans this long, the story gets so convoluted and you jump back and forth from character to character and even some secondary characters that you're never really too invested in any single plotline. And while there are moments of brilliance, it unfortunately never really gains much momentum. And by the time you start to feel some emotional connection for specific characters, they've often been relegated to a lesser role, or worse yet, they've died. And you have to connect to an entirely new character all over again, which might not be that difficult if the writing had been a little more lively, hadn't felt so inorganic in certain emotional parts. Another major issue with the story was that you had no way of understanding particular relationships, political affiliations, or one character's involvement with another character without purchasing an art book or an extra manual that helped you understand specific relationships among characters. And while this would certainly be interesting if the information weren't entirely pertinent, but it is pertinent and very important in many situations, and it would have been an excellent bit of world building to have some of this information buried within the video game, without needing to seek external sources to understand why particular characters did certain things, or to understand the past of an important figure. I don't want to disparage the story too much, and because of the nature of it, spanning many generations, it certainly has some dramatic and climactic moments, like Gustav's eventual return to his homeland to claim his throne. But it makes me wonder how brilliant this story could have been had they chose to focus on Gustav and Will's story alone, rather than stretching it generations into the future. When you spend hours playing a character or seeing a story unfold, it becomes increasingly difficult to let that character go. But to ask a player to do this over and over again eventually takes a toll and lessens the connection one might ordinarily feel for a well-developed character. The massive scope of Saga Frontier 2, while ambitious, was more of a detriment to character development and cohesion than a boon to it. While Saga Frontier 2's fighting system held on to some of the first game's core values, it lightened up in many crucial areas and made it a more accessible fighting system to most. There are 3 different battle types: solo, group, or army. The army battles are very rare and usually come with specific winning conditions. They're fun and far more strategic, but they just don't happen that often. The group version tends to play out like most traditional RPGs. It's turn-based, and you elect commands from menus that are easy to navigate. This might seem like a backhanded compliment, but menu systems are an important part of any RPG, and if they're cumbersome or convoluted or difficult to read or understand, it really lessens the enjoyment one gets out of the fighting system. That is not the case with Saga Frontier 2. You can use weapon abilities, hybrid commands, or spells. There are multiple resources in this game to monitor, and while it is a very interesting concept, can sometimes feel a bit overwhelming when you're having to monitor many different limited resources. Most weapons have limited use. The items you buy to use different animas also have limited use and can break mid-battle if you're not careful. And though the story explanation of why quells are superior to the perishable items you purchase is interesting and intriguing, it's still a little frustrating to have to monitor their usage so closely in combat. Though admittedly, this does add a little extra layer of strategy, as you're not able to just roll through dungeons with some of the highest level spells constantly, because not only will you break your items, but you'll also run out of SP. Though a welcome addition to Saga Frontier 2 was the ability to regain WP and SP in between battles. It addressed one of the major flaws in the first game. You also can gain chunks of HP back, and if you're a little low on HP in certain battles, you have an ability to use LP, life points, which also has a limited resource, to gain back your health pool. Once LP hits 0 though, your character is dead. Some moves in the game even use LP or sap LP from you, and since it is such a limited pool, it is something that must be looked after. You can also use it if you've run out of WP or SP, sort of as a last-ditch effort. I actually quite enjoyed this system, as there aren't a lot of healing spells early, and you'd often rather be using major spells or comboing different skills together rather than wasting a heal when you could use a life point instead. But throughout the vast majority of the game, you're free to use them as you need them to heal. Each character also has various proficiencies in weapons and in spells, and this adds another dynamic of expertise and specialization to the fighting system. While you're free to use whatever weapons you want on any character, and you can also gain skills on any weapon or any skill usage, a higher proficiency in a specific area means that those spells are stronger, or an attack with a particular weapon is stronger. Nothing groundbreaking or revolutionary, but it just adds another layer of depth. There are actually various methods to learning different skills. In a group battle, you can have what's called a flash up, where essentially you learn a skill in the middle of a battle and it's determined randomly and is dependent on your level and the monster's level. The other way is to know the input command or to experiment with it in the duel portion of combat. I actually thoroughly enjoyed this aspect of combat. It's really fun experimenting with different inputs to see what you get. If you already know a skill, or a character gets a skill, that skill is accessible to every character you have. It unlocks it for everybody. The only types of spells immune to these are hybrid spells, which are very powerful spells and much harder to learn. In fact, you can play the majority of the game without realizing that they even exist. Another important part of the fighting system in Saga Frontier 2 is the combo mechanic. Many skills can be combined with other skills to create powerful combos. It's an interesting system. The more skills and abilities you're able to unlock by experimenting with combos in the duel part of combat, the more skills and spells you're able to combo in the group style of combat. I wish they'd included a more thorough tutorial, as it took me quite a bit to understand some of these mechanics, and a lot of external sources to understand how one even levels up specific skills, why they're leveling up, whether it was random or not, and what a flash skill even is in the game. There were so many different resources to manage that it would have made that barrier a little less hard to break through and to understand. Because when this combat system really starts to come together mid to late game and you have multiple combos that you know and can string together, it's a blast, and there are many layers of depth to it. I admire a game that doesn't stick to standard tried and true combat techniques and traditional leveling up systems. It's different, it's fun, and it's challenging, something many RPGs shy away from. I have to say that the part of the game I enjoyed the most was probably the hand-painted watercolor 2D backgrounds. They are stunning and wonderful to look at and varied from place to place. I found myself, when selecting the next location to visit, really excited to see the type of detail that they were able to fit into each location. I can't fathom how much they must have paid the artists that worked on this game. Even if you're not interested in the story, the combat, or any other aspect of the game, I'd check it out for the backgrounds alone. While all of the characters are 2D sprites, they all look pretty good. There isn't a lot of duplication other than some foot soldiers and regular troops. The only bit of 3D in the game takes place in the background during battle scenes, And I suppose this is only so that they can have a rotating camera. And while yes, it looks pretty bad in certain areas, it's nothing that detracts from the overall game. This is definitely a visually pleasing game with a unique style. Though the soundtrack is impressive in areas and does little to dissuade one from listening to it, there aren't many memorable or iconic tracks. There is variance from town to town and a subtle change of the battle theme in different areas, but it's largely an uninspired effort. While I have been fairly negative about many aspects of the game, I must say that when it is firing on all cylinders, it's one heck of a game. It can easily make its case as one of the greats. I found myself at times genuinely affected by Gustav's early struggles, but it was disappointing that I was ripped away from some great characters so early or only got to experience a little bit of their adventure. I admire the scope and I admire the vision, but there were too many memorable moments lost because they wanted to keep it moving on a grand scale. If you're an RPG fan that loves to be challenged, this is certainly a game for you. Its fighting system, while your investment will have to be large to learn all of its ins and outs, will reward you for patience and research. Once you've learned the combos, and once you know specific moves and you understand how things function, it's a very enjoyable system. It's just quirky and deviates from so many of the RPG standards that I think it'll catch a lot of players off guard a little bit. But if you can stick with it, it definitely has its merits. Thanks for watching, guys, and if you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on the video. This has been Andrew with High Level Reviews, and I appreciate you guys stopping by.